is experiencing being an other in a different culture. And there are other levels of being other, including some other characters who have similar experiences of feeling misplaced where they are. So there were so many reasons why, even though I thought about naming it something else, I just kept coming back to that word. And so I feel like it was the right title for the book.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it does have a really negative connotation usually, and she has these negative experiences being a foreigner. But are there any ways in which it's also positive? I mean, it seems like it's part of how she grows as a character because she's other.
Right. So, I mean, I think it's a word that people familiar with Japan know the word, and when I was living there, I had at least one person yell that term at me while trying to kick me off my bike. So that just stuck in my memory, but
Yeah.
I had many positive experiences there as well. And I think that in this case, it's sort of, I know it has a lot of sort of oomph behind it as a powerful word, but I felt like it was appropriate because she experiences a fair amount of difficulty when she first arrives in the country. And I wanted it to be clear that she didn't feel welcome. She did not feel like she was in the place that she belonged at the beginning.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you want to talk about your own experiences at all with going to Japan, or I don't know if those helped to lead to the writing of the novel?
Sure. I was one of those people that when I got out of college, I wanted to be a writer, but I didn't know exactly what that looked like. And I was living in Japan. And so I marched into the first English language publication I could find. This was in the 90s. And asked for a job, and miraculously, and I was, irrationally optimistic, they gave me a job. And so I started out working in Japan as a reporter, actually, and then as an editor, and I lived there for 4 years. So I experienced a lot of positive things and some negative things, but was the launching point for the story. Although the story is complete fiction, it's not me, the character is not me, the things that happen to her are not me, just that more like inspired from instances and things that happened while I was there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And how did Lucy end up going to Japan? You want to talk a little about the circumstances under which she ends up deciding to go to Japan?
Sure. Well, it's always a man, isn't it? There's always a man somewhere in there. So she's young and naive, and she meets a Japanese man while she's in college at Northwestern University, which is in Evanston, Illinois. And she's just kind of dazzled by this, exotic foreigner. And he was very cool and very sophisticated. And she just fell for him. But on top of falling for him, she fell for the culture of his country because he spent a lot of time telling her and showing her things about the culture. So it wasn't just that she went to Japan to find the guy. She also went because she had formed an idealized image of the country in her mind. And so she had to go and see if the guy and the country were as she had expected them to be. I don't know if I should tell you what she finds out.
Yeah. Well, just after she arrives, this happens early in the novel. So just after she arrives in Okinawa, a U.S. serviceman is accused of raping a 15-year-old Japanese girl. And the incident makes the headlines. And then as a reporter, eventually, Lucy covers this trial. And it's a really riveting scene. Do you want to read just a couple pages of it?
Sure, let me do that. So as Karen said, Lucy's job is as a reporter in Japan. And so she's not only experiencing life herself, she's reporting on it. So she gets access to courtrooms and places that maybe others wouldn't have access to. And this scene is at the trial. An airman, Air Force commissioned officer has been accused of the assault of a Japanese teenager. And so this is her experience in the courtroom. This room had the witness stand in the center of the room facing the judge, not angled toward the audience as it would have been in a US courtroom. Japan's judicial system was strict, and this requirement that witness face the judge amplified that point. The witnesses were not there so the audience could watch them squirm or assess their appearance or ponder their veracity. Witnesses sat below and up close to a single black-robed decision maker, both judge and jury, for the fate of the accused. The tables for the lawyers of the accused and the accusers were on opposite sides of the room, facing the center, positioned like boxers about to spar. When we took our seats in the gallery, the judge was already sitting behind his bench, thumbing through papers, and police officers stood on each side of him and by all the doors. Two women at small desks, a court reporter and a translator, flanked the judge. The room filled with people who held muted conversations so as not to ignite the voltage in the air. It's about another page, not too long. Airman Stone, a hulking man with black skin contrasted against his pale blue prison garb, entered the courtroom through a side door. Handcuffs and leg irons forced him to walk in a heavy shuffle. Guards sat him at the table and took up posts nearby. Colonel Abdir was already seated there and spoke to Stone, touched his arm, and patted him on the back. I'd read somewhere that lawyers often touch guilty clients to fool people into thinking the client could be trusted. I stole side glances at Stone's face and could see a bulging vein down his temple. He looked powerful and hopeless at the same time, surrounded by guards and suited lawyers. At the other table were two Japanese men in suits, sitting silently. A side door opened, and there she was, the elusive Midori Ishikori, flanked by her parents and two big bodyguards. The room went silent, all eyes on the tiny teenager. Her lawyers rose and escorted her to the table, while her parents and the guards took seats at the front of the gallery. Stone didn't look at her, but she glanced at him and then away. She was even prettier in person than in the two photos I'd seen. More mature than her 15 years, with big eyes and shiny lip gloss. The next 30 minutes went by in a blur. One of Midori's lawyers made a brief statement, as did Colonel Abdir. Neither Stone nor Midori took the stand, but there was an electric moment where the judge asked Midori a question, and she turned towards Stone and pointed a delicate finger at him. At first, Stone stared into the distance and didn't acknowledge her at all. But then, as the judge began to read the charges against him, statutory rape, sexual battery, Stone shot up out of his chair. A guard jumped over and grabbed his arm and tried to force him back down, but Stone yanked his arm away. Before police officers could respond, Stone strained toward Midori's table, the chains from his leg irons clanking on the floor. "Whore," he growled. With one collective intake of air, the spectators and the media in the courtroom ossified. "Whore," Stone said again, his voice firm and furious. I'll stop there.
Yeah. Such a powerful scene.
Thank you. It's kind of the accused accusing the accuser.
Yeah, which happens a lot, as we know.
Right.
And I know you did so much research for this book. Do you want to just give us some background in American-Japanese relationships, especially in Okinawa, which is...
Sure, I will. But I mean, I want to say for sure that I didn't write the book to sort of put myself out there as an spokesperson for the country relations, but because of the situation in Okinawa, you can't write a book there without addressing those things. So when I was there, and to this day, you know, there are protests in the street every day of the week because the US military takes up about 17% of the island with its bases. And a lot of the local people resent this, right? So they feel that it's, you know, usurping their land and some of their power. And a way that I would well, it's true that American military people can leave the base and they can go out into the community and do whatever and go to stores and restaurants. But if you are an Okinawan, if you're a Japanese person, you can't go on base. So you have no, the door goes one way. Americans go out and go out, but Japanese can't go in unless they're employed on the base, which is sometimes the case. But so there's tension, and there's always been tension. Ever since World War II, when Americans set up bases there, there have been calls to get us out. And it's, you know, I don't take a stance on that. I know that the island is strategic in US military positioning, so I understand that. But just for purposes of the book, it's an interesting thing to be an American in a place where there is a fair amount of hostility toward Americans. Not everybody for sure, but there are people in the street every day, you know, protesting and wishing for us to not be there. So my character is naive and didn't quite realize the extent of that until she got there and witnessed the protests and, you know, been reading the headlines and all of these things.
Yeah, and then there's those two very different worlds of kind of Okinawa and then the military base.
Right, very different. It's like the bases are very structured and organized and, you know, designed and architected to be a certain way. And then out, of course, in the regular world, it's just as normal here, you know, businesses and houses and apartments and, you know, everything else going on. So it's just a normal community outside the base, you know.
Yeah, these two different worlds existing kind of side by side.
With a gate right between them.
Yeah.
A gate with armed guards. Yeah.
Yeah, I could really feel that in the novel. Those two, the kind of the conflicts that get set up between those two worlds.
Yeah.
In the bigger picture. I have to say also, I love that, we were talking a little bit about this earlier, I love that your novel isn't a romance and that it's not like a young woman goes to Japan and falls in love.
Right.
So I was thinking about that after we talked, and it occurred to me that we both sort of wrote these anti-romances almost, these stories where a love interest doesn't work out. And then it's the interesting thing that happens in the novel is what happens after the love interest doesn't work out. And it's kind of comes after like a failed romance. And, you know, that in a way, I think, especially in your novel, like the character then ends up kind of growing and changing almost because of that failure, and then being on her own as she travels to Japan. So I don't know if you just want to talk a little bit about Lucy's journey as a young woman, and I don't know, some of the discoveries that she makes about the world and maybe about herself.
Well, I first want to just acknowledge that the book your new novel that I just read, the music book, we both have characters who have the potential for a romance, like it's there, it starts there, or there is that, but various circumstances and world events and character, you know, traits cause the romances not to be a fully formed thing, right? So in a book, something like that happens. And in my book, you could, if you picked it up, you could definitely think, oh, it's a sweet romance about a woman who follows a lover to Japan. But it's different than that, because it's really a more of a coming of age story. And it's a bit of a, you know, a statement about finding your way in the world without hanging your hat on a relationship, but sort of doing it on your own. And I don't see Karen anymore. Is she gone? Oh, no. Oh no, it's just
Uh-oh. I'm still here. So yeah, there, she must have had a little bit of technical difficulty there. So
hopefully she'll pop back in.
hopefully she'll pop back in. So we'll watch for her there. But go continue with what you were just talking about.
Sure. Well, I mean, so I can't, I mean,
Here she comes.
I know it's like a friends compliment group or whatever to compliment her novel and have her compliment mine, but it's sincere. You know, her
Right.
book is an amazing book, and I just read it. I finished it about a month ago. And her book deals with the coming of age story of of the person's entire life, right? So this person starts as a teen and goes all the way to old age. Mine
Wow.
is right, and it's amazing. It's an amazing. Mine is a very prescribed amount of time. So mine is from college to a few years after college, and then the bulk of the book takes place in about 4 months because that's that's how it goes. But it's my daughter's. It's funny because Vivian said, "Why didn't you have her get together with the guy?" And I'm like, well, it just wouldn't have been the thing,
Sometimes it's better to not have that neat, happy thing,
Yeah, I just gave away a little bit of the plot, but that's not the major part of the plot. That's just a part of the plot. She definitely has some romantic entanglements, but Vivian was sad that I didn't like tie it up with a bow like that, and I said, well, I think that's the difference maybe between genre writing and literary writing.
Mm-hmm.
So, Karen and I are trying to write characters that are true to their character. And so Lucy in my book was much more interested in finding her way and figuring out who she really was outside of what she had expected than she was in like, I'm going to, fill my life with another person. She kind of needed to do that on her own. So that's it. That's how I approached it. You know what I mean, Karen?
Oh yeah. So it's more true to life too. So I think it's believable because of that. And I think that if you're true to life the way you were in that novel, that those are the kinds of books we need to be reading, because they tell us something about life, and they maybe like open a window into your own self that you didn't know was there, because of the realism that's in it.
I agree.
And she certainly changes a lot, I think, in the novel. She becomes a lot more confident and kind of committed to Japan also, which is really interesting.
Right. So it is because, well, she starts out as this other, and over a period of time and experience, she gains understanding both of the culture and of herself and of specific other characters. And I think, isn't that what we all are trying to do is, learn things about ourselves and the world, and reading about something like a culture that you are not familiar with. I mean, I always say, like, I would never have written a book to teach someone a sociology lesson. That's not my my axe to grind. I was just trying to write a story that would break your heart or make you feel a lot of things, make a reader feel a lot of things. That was my goal. But you have to set it somewhere, and you have to set it in a circumstance. And so whatever the reality is of the circumstances, they turn into a character, if you will, in the novel. So,
well,
I'm going to pop back off again, and I'll come back on when we have some questions for the audience. So Karen, if technology happens again, I'll pop back on.
Thank you.
Thanks, Julie.
Yeah, not sure what that glitch was.
I don't know.
Yeah, I just want to say that I found the setting of that book from the very beginning. I remember when you're first writing it, I found the setting so interesting, and the kind of conflict that's there in Okinawa, especially, after the defeat of Japan and then the bombing. And then you can imagine that then we have this permanent military base. And then it was such an interesting decision, and I think a good one, to have us see it through the perspective of this young woman who doesn't really know a lot about that, and then is suddenly in the midst of this conflict. So we learn about it in some of the same ways that she learns about it. over
Right.
those months.
Well, and through her eyes, right? Because there's all the topic of, cultural appropriation and so on these days. And I would never claim to know, I mean, I can only write it through, in that case, an other's eyes, someone who's not from there. So I don't, I mean, I think if you're writing about a culture as an observer, versus claiming to be inside of it, I think it's not really trying to be a cultural appropriator. It's just more seeing what you saw and what you experienced and writing about that.
Well, it shows us that in some way or another, we are all other.
Yes.
In some way or another, we all have the ability to be a stranger. And I think that's important.
Right. And I mean, I didn't set out to do this, of course, but it's been pointed out to me that it ends up being very timely because of the other status of being, feeling like you're not wanted or not, not in the right place, because a lot of people feel that way these days. And then also the idea of ongoing daily street protests, which again, that's just a fact of what happens over there. But people don't really hear about it because it's not really in the news that much. But it's certainly a pressing matter to the people who are engaged in the street protests,
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, and that's real early in her experience. I mean, she just gets in a car, right, as I recall, right after she gets there, and is riding through the streets, and all of a sudden they're surrounded by all these protesters.
Yeah. Because of the crime accusation. So like all the time there are people protesting, but whenever a crime occurs by an American, the protests get much bigger. So we can find a parallel here to what's happening here today in the United States. There are protests going on, and then when something happens to ignite more protests, they grow bigger.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So that was an accidental parallel, but it happened,
And she's a journalist, which of course then there's that interest of like, they're covering the protests, so you learn more and more about it.
Well, you write about a musician, so you're writing about the day-to-day work and life of a person who's making a living as a musician, right? Well, so same. She's a working person, so she's, the machinations of her working life are a very key part of her experience. She's not like a character floating out on a beach somewhere. She's going to an office every day and experiencing all the things that go on there.
Yeah, all of that feels very authentic in the book. Did you draw on some of your own experiences? I'm imagining you did as a journalist.
Yeah, for sure. But I mean, a lot more bad stuff happens to my character than happened to me, when I lived there, because I put a lot in that few months that I wrote about her there. In my time in Japan, I had many positive, amazing experiences, many cultural immersive moments and things that were just beautiful, and she doesn't experience all as much of that as I did, but she might later, so I think it's a real look at someone who's working and living in a foreign culture.
Yeah. Well, you had said that when we talked that you read my novel and thought of The Song of the Lark by Willa Cather. And so I was commenting that she was a big early influence on me. And
Right.
and in fact, I went back and remembered that I read The Death Comes for the Archbishop several times while I was writing Between Earth and Sky, because it takes place in the same time period and the same location almost.
Right.
And so what do you want to talk a little bit about some of the influences on you by other writers?
Well, sure. I mean, I hope it's interesting. I think it's interesting to people who are readers to hear us talk about who we like, because then it makes them want to go read more other stuff, right? So for sure, when I read your most recent novel, I had just read The Song of the Lark, and I was just like, oh my gosh. The amazing thing is, they just are beautiful, descriptive stories of women coming into their artistic fruition. So that to me was an amazing parallel right off the bat. But for me, I sometimes could be accused of being an overwriter. I write a lot of words and a lot of descriptive words, and I really like poetic prose. So I do feel like people like Louise Erdrich, Nabokov, people who write, Arundhati Roy, who writes amazing run-on sentences with words that they even just made up or put together in very poetic expressions. Those kinds of writers really deeply influence me when I read them. Also, though, I do tend to favor reading contemporary American women writers. So Joan Connor, Eugenia Kim, Nalini Jones, Karen Osborn, Hollis Seaman, Porchista Kapoor, people that I was able to study under and also read, absolutely had influence on me. So, and still do all the time.
Yeah.
What about you?
And then
What else do you like other than Willa Cather?
Well, I was really influenced. I think I'm still really influenced by Virginia Woolf. So she was another big early influence.
Yeah.
To an extent, Chekhov probably has influenced everyone.
Right.
Are many writers. Toni Morrison was a huge influence.
Sure.
I remember because she's so I was reading her starting in college, I think. I know in graduate school I read Sula and The Bluest Eye, the earlier novels. And then she came out with Beloved. And I just remember I recently reread that, and I was blown away again. I remember reading that book and just having to go back and read it all over again. Like, oh, this is what a novel can do. I think it probably did that for a lot of people, just changed your whole idea of what you thought was possible.
Right. I mean, and those are amazing moments when you read something that reminds you what you want to try to do as a writer. It kind of makes you feel like, oh, I can work more and make this even stronger so that it resonates with people more.
Well, yeah. And of course that novel was so groundbreaking in that, oh, who knew that there could be all these voices at once talking to tell a story, and that they would all have the kind of music that she gave them.
Right.
But so I do go back and I reread a lot of things again and again. I'm sure you do that.
I do, but there are so many books and current authors, I can't get to them all. So I'm, struggling to keep up with what's going on in the literary world for sure. Yeah.
There's a lot of great things out there, including your novel, which has just come out.
This one?
I don't know. I was thinking that it might be fun here at the end. I think we're towards the end. I thought it might be fun if you wanted to just read even just a page of the prologue. I just think the prologue is so lovely. And because we were just talking a little about language, and then listeners could hear a little bit of the language.
Thank you. Yeah. Okay, so prologues, for anybody who's listening, are not always in favor. There are a lot of people who just think prologues should not be. However, I like prologues, so I went ahead and wrote one, and here is part of it. It starts with a poem, and it is Mono no Aware, which in Japanese means awareness of impermanence. And this is a poem that I wrote. Love, tea, and flowers, impermanent, transcendent, Are you aware of beauty that flames up and out before it can root itself in the earth of truth? Memory is truth, like brown dirt smeared on a cherry blossom pink canvas. And so that poem was inspired by Japanese porcelain, which is gilded with something called maki, which is basically like sprinkled gold dust or silver dust on a piece of porcelain. So it makes that porcelain glow with metallic glow. It's a very beautiful thing if you ever get the chance to look at it. And so I'll read you just the first paragraph. A person or a memory can sit inside of you and you might have no choice about it. You don't have to think about a person for him to be a part of you. That's what my best friend Rose told me years ago in a moment when she saw me more clearly than I saw myself. A moment when I was restless and heartsick about to board a plane to Japan. So there you go.
Great. Beautiful.
Thank you.
There does seem to be a controversy about prologues, isn't there?
Yes. I mean,
Funny.
just let us do what we want, okay? It's
I know, I don't get
it. It's like, it's not going to
I
hurt
don't
you.
either.
Prologue. What's the big whoop?
I know. I just am like, these people are just like, I just, you know, like you said, it's a fiction, it's novel. It's like, do what you want. There's no rules.
It's almost like after Donna Tartt did her prologue, that was it. We weren't allowed to do them anymore. We're like, that was the prologue. And after that prologue, we all had to dispense with prologues. But, you know, I think it's okay if we just do them if we want to.
Yeah, it's a really interesting, it's very interesting comment on it. So there are a lot of great comments in the comment section. So Sarah, you may want to go back in and look at those afterwards. Because there's just, you know, everybody's excited. They said it was a great conversation. People are saying hi, that they're so proud of you. So there's lots of great love that you have in the
That's so nice.
So yeah, so you might want to. So nobody's really asked a question, so I'll throw in one to take us a few more minutes here. So you talked about the title. Let's talk about the cover.
Okay.
How involved were you in doing the cover? Because it's a great cover.
So my original website was designed by a brilliant fine artist, and she had started with this kind of motif, and she incorporated some artwork from the Bellarmine Museum that I had done poems about. So my website had the same color palette with sort of these colors and the pink and the burgundy and the cherry blossoms. And so when the publisher said to me, well, what do you picture? I said, well, I kind of pictured that because I already pictured that. But I also think that needs to be mystery because we don't know who this guy is. And they did this the first time and it came back to me and I was like, I love it. I don't want you to change it at all. So this was one and done. They sent it back and I said, oh, I love it.
That's fantastic because that's usually not the case.
Yeah. My daughter said,
very rare.
The daughter says, I think the guy looks weird. And I said, you know, weird is okay for me. I want a little weird. So we're going to leave that guy like that.
Yeah. And then for both of you, I know that having done a lot of these, and you're right, Sarah, when you said that people do like to hear who influences you and who you're reading lately. And so another thing that I know that listeners like to hear is the process. So I'm going to ask both of you, what's your process? Are you write every day? Are you morning, night? So Karen, why don't we start with you? What's your writing process?
Yeah, well, when I'm in the middle of writing a novel, I am writing every day, and I often go through a period, in fact, where I'm sort of writing for many hours every day, and I don't do a lot of reading then, and but it often takes me a while to get to that place where I think the beginning for me is a search for the novel almost. I write what I call a junk draft first. I've never known anybody else who does this. I write it in about 3 months, and I write it just to find out what I've got and what's going on and what the story might be. And then I'll have some ideas about it. I still won't know completely where I'm going, and then at that point, I do a lot of research for most of my books. So I start researching, I'm writing some scenes that I might know about. And then when I finally have in my mind if I have the language, the voice, that's key for me. And then once I've got the scope of the story, for the most part, in my head, like I can see it all in terms of the scenes, that's when I just really kind of plow into it. And I often will even, it can be exhausting, because by then the voice of the novel is so strong that I've got to get it all down.
You got to get it
like
yourself. So do you plow through? Do you do like full 8-hour days, or do you longer or shorter?
Oh yeah, and I've stayed up all night. I've done things like that. Yeah, until I get it all down, and then there's revision after that. But that's usually for me. That's usually a pretty more complete draft. I've got most of it by the end of that.
How about you, Sarah? What's your process?
Well, this is my first novel, right? So it started sort of with an inciting incident. And so I kind of ended up writing from the middle outward. So like I had the middle, I had a few scenes that I knew for sure, and then I had to decide how to develop the character. So that went backwards in time, and then I had to decide, where she was going. So I kind of wrote it like that. And no, I didn't write 8 hours a day. I wrote it over a period of years and had to step away and then come back. Like my brain percolated for a while and then would come back, and then I would go and then I would come back. So I'm really hopeful that the next one is not going to take as long.
so's everybody else who's read it, who wants the next book from you. So that's
right.
they're very impatient. Readers are a very impatient breed. So we do have a couple questions came in while we were talking. So David wants to know, Sarah, did you ever visit the suicide forest?
David? What's his last name? This David that we're talking.
Somebody you may know, maybe?
No, I never went there. I've certainly been near there because it's right near Mount Fuji, and it's near the base of Mount Fuji actually. And I didn't really want to go there, but because it's a really horrifying place. And interestingly, early on, some of my beloved writers group friends, who some are probably listening now, who I love and adore and thank very much for all their help, said, "Oh, you should name the book Suicide Forest, because that'll scare everybody and make them." And I said, well, the problem with that is it's really not about that. I mean, there is a scene there, but that would be a misnomer. And Suicide Forest, Ogikahara, as it's called in Japanese, is a very scary place. You don't really want to go there. It's like people do go there. It's a historic place where people commit suicide and or infirm loved ones were left to die. It, when the family couldn't afford them or whatever, they would just, and this place is so tree covered and so dark, and there very little light gets in there at all. So apparently, by all accounts, by all the research I did and all the pictures and so on that I looked at, it's extremely dark. So I don't want to go there.
Yeah, sounds fascinating, but I think I would rather do what you did, is just research it and look at what other people's experience. So Grace has asked, are any of the characters in your book based on someone you knew?
So the lead character, the protagonist, is named after my niece, Lucy Zimmer, and she knows that I've been naming this character after her, and that's a family name in my family, Lucy. And actually too, I named the graphic artist Rumiko, and that was a graphic artist that I knew in Japan, although this character is not really her, it's a different person, but I did take that name. But Lucy is the main one.
And then Ramona we'll take this final question from Ramona. Did you allude to a sequel?
No. I don't allude to things, I just do them. No. I don't, I really, I mean, I say this, I'm kind of joking, but I'm kind of not joking. I wrote this from the point of view of a 20-something-year-old woman, and that's great. And I was, you know, it was a great learning experience for me. And I wrote it in the first person, so it's first person point of view. But in the future novels, I will definitely write from a perspective of somebody who's a little bit older, just because I personally find people that have a little more life experience sometimes, you know, more to talk about there. Not that there's not a full life in a 25-year-old. I'm just saying, like, for me, I think I'd rather get into the head of someone a little bit older next time. So I love Lucy, but she's just got to do her own thing now.
She might be one of those recurring characters, maybe. Who knows? We may be seeing her in the future in maybe 10 years when she's 30 something.
No.
Or 40 or 50.
Yeah, exactly. Well, this was a great conversation. Karen, if people are interested in following, do you have a website that people can go to follow your work, or?
I do. So it's just KarenOsborn.net.
Okay, perfect. And Sarah, how about you?
SarahZSleeper.com.
Okay, and they can find like all your, if you're on social media or anything through
There's,
that.
right, all the social media links are there. There's links to, you know, other stories and poems and things that I've written, and there's a lot of book reviews and so on. There's a lot of stuff there, so please check it out.
Yeah, excellent.
Yeah.
Well, thank you both. This was a great conversation. Again, I want to remind everybody that the links are in the comment section to buy both Sarah and Karen's latest book. We can ship those to you. It was a great conversation. This will reside on our Facebook page. You can share it if you'd like, and go back and look at it from the beginning if you joined us late, and we'll also have it on our YouTube page. So with that, I am going to sign us off of Facebook. Thank you, everybody.
Okay, thank you so much, Julie. This was such a pleasure. Karen, mwah.
Thank you. It's wonderful. Thank
Okay,
you
take
both.
care. See you guys later. Bye.
Okay,
Bye-bye.
that's the live stream's done. Now hold on, let me